1994. Britpop had arrived, and Scotland produced a brand new music festival to show it off. Tea in the Park. There was also protest in the park, the car park, as the battle between modernity and tradition for control of one of the biggest clubs in the world reached fever pitch.
This was a board that could not continue in charge of that great institution, which is Celtic Football Club.
The rebels have won. Yeah!
We knew the clouds were gathering thick and fast.
I really didn't want to be part of the destruction of Celtic's soul.
It had a kind of bunker feeling about it, didn't it? You know, it's as if they're going to pick up a revolver at any moment and blow their brains out.
With just crumbs left in their biscuit tin, perhaps a win on the newly launched National Lottery could have been the answer to the Celtic board's prayers. Alas,
the calibre of player that Celtic signed at the time was deeply unimpressive. You ask any Celtic fan and he'll utter two words to you: Wayne and Biggins.
Rangers. Now they were impressive. If they won the Scottish Cup in 1994, they'd complete an unprecedented double treble. Go on, work it out.
Get the double the treble in the first two trophies of the third year. I think if they'd won the Scottish Cup, it would have been a world record.
But they did have their troubles. Star striker Duncan Ferguson found himself in the dock of the High Court at the centre of one of the most sensational criminal trials of the decade.
It's ridiculous, something that happened on a football field, and Duncan Ferguson going to jail.
But what was really ridiculous in 1994 was the thought that Wraith Rovers, in their first cup final for almost half a century, could overcome a resurgent Celtic.
I remember sending the ball with Ali Graham, and we says to each other, listen, we've got maybe one more chance left here.
Scottish football provided its own fireworks when on January the 1st, 1994, Rangers headed east to bring in the new year at the home of their fiercest rivals, Celtic.
A great chance for Rangers right at the start of the match. And Hadley scores!
And like so many nerdy house parties, when the successful neighbours dropped by to remind everyone how much better they are, it descended into a bit of a rammy.
Rangers scored 2 early goals to justify the worst suspicions of Celtic fans that their team wasn't capable of competing.
In possession, there's Hadley again. Now Jury! And the third score by Mikhailichenko!
The crowd in the stand was turning away from the pitch and shouting abuse at the director's box. And I think if you put yourself in the position of a director, that must have been quite mortifying and quite shaking.
You're disappointed at the venom that was directed at yourself, you know, and you say, well, we're not playing football, we're not on the park, you know, it's the players really have to stand up a wee bit, you know, as well. We can't take all the blame for everything.
If you were Kevin Kelly or Michael Kelly or David Smith sitting in any of these front row seats with this growing, baying mob, you would have been extremely worried.
I think that day they realised they were doomed.
To understand the fury unleashed on the board of directors that day, it's necessary to go back to the late 1980s and the bankrolling of the Graham Souness revolution by David Murray. Rangers broke all the financial rules of Scottish football and happily ran up a huge debt in order to put a winning team on the park.
The bar was raised, the financial stakes were raised, and you always had an impression from 86 onwards that Celtic were struggling to hold on to Rangers' coattails.
Fortunately for Celtic fans, by early 1994, Rangers' coattail was a speck in the distance. It had been 5 long years since they'd seen Celtic win a trophy. And as Rangers monopolised the championship, what made this bad situation unbearable for Celtic fans was that Celtic weren't even the best of the rest. In those barren years, Aberdeen had won both the Scottish Cup and the League Cup. Hibernian took the League Cup back to Edinburgh in 1991. And in that same year, even Motherwell won the Scottish Cup for the first time in 40 years. In the league, Celtic were usually a distant third, and once, even a distant fifth. By 1994, fed up with a losing team on the pitch, the car park outside the stadium had become home to many an impromptu demonstration by fans, and the chant, "Sack the board," had replaced "Hail, hail" as the most popular refrain among the dwindling band of supporters.
How much money have the Kellys, the Whites, the Farrows and the Grants put into Celtic Football Club, and how much have they took out?
They weren't in danger of being left behind. They were being left behind. Something had to be done to give them a future, and I don't think anyone on that board at the time had any idea what to do.
Fergus McCann reckoned he knew what to do. The Scots-Canadian businessman and lifelong Celtic fan could only watch from Montreal with a growing sense of frustration as Celtic slid deeper into debt and further down the league. Back in 1988, McCann's offer of money for ground improvements had been rejected by Celtic.
I would lend the club the money at half the bank rate, and secondly, I would work in a project to do marketing for the club of season tickets and other sources, and in return for that, get a commission doing that. And no control, no shares, no board directorship, nothing. I would do that and go away. Well, when are you going back to Montreal, Fergus, was the question I usually would hear as I go to visit a game or something. So it became very clear that the better the offer I made, the more terrified they became.
What they feared was loss of control. Celtic Football and Athletic Company Limited was a family business whose board of directors was descended from the same families who'd founded the club 100 years earlier.
I was very much aware of the Kelly connection from 1888 through my grandfather, James Kelly, who was approached to be the first captain. So it went from there right through to Uncle Bob in the late 40s, and then when I came in the 70s. So it was a continuation of the Kelly connection with Celtic Football Club.
And if you look throughout the whole world of business, family ownerships have tended to peter out. In some ways it's sad, but you get to a certain point where the generation who's in charge is not fit to compare with 2 or 3 generations earlier.
Unfortunately for Celtic, a 19th century business model wasn't the ideal for dealing with the demands of football in the late 20th century. And their inadequacies were exposed when, following the disaster at Hillsborough, in which 96 Liverpool fans died, all-seater stadia became a legal requirement for senior football clubs. Faced with this massive task, and recognising their own limitations, the board co-opted a Glasgow businessman, Brian Dempsey, and Dr. Michael Kelly, another descendant of the club's pioneers.
We are going to go the distance now. We're going to learn from the mistakes. We're going to learn by the actual construction of others, and we hope to provide the Celtic supporter and our customers with the most up-to-date facilities as and when we have finished the research necessary.
My remit was to add some external experience from within the family. Brian Dempsey's role seemed to be much more of a financial one. He was a property developer, and therefore he was going to bring that kind of expertise into looking for a stadium site for Celtic.
Brian has property development expertise. Michael Kelly has a marketing expertise. On the face of it, it looks good. It looks as if they're addressing the management issues, and it looks as if they're addressing the stadium issues.
The board moved quickly, and a plan, championed by Brian Dempsey, to build a new stadium at Rob Royston in the north of Glasgow was unveiled. Dempsey's plan found favour with the majority of the directors, but was opposed by the largest shareholder, Chris White, who, with the support of the other newcomer, Michael Kelly, not only defeated the Rob Royston proposal, but also, after just 5 months, removed Dempsey from the board.
It seemed to me that what would happen is that we would enter into Rob Royston, commit a lot of funds that we didn't have, and as a consequence be forced to issue shares, which would then result in control of the club being lost. It's as simple as that.
They definitely seem to be more interested in staying in control of the football club at the expense of finding a solution for the problem, which they didn't truly accept that they had.
Dempsey's sacking could not have come at a worse time for Celtic, coming as it did on the eve of an Old Firm Cup final. And as the fans trudged to Hampden, the talk once more was about the shenanigans in the boardroom.
Joe Miller teeing it up, driven forward, the deflection! Paul Elliott! Quickly getting the touch to McCoy's. Walters! Stevens Hoisting the high one for Hadley. In comes Richard. Goal!
While Celtic's defeat may have had nothing to do with the removal of Brian Dempsey, the manner of his dismissal would come back to haunt the board.
It was gratuitous. It was to teach him a lesson. I don't think anybody can argue with that. They had the votes in the bag. They did not have to publicly humiliate him.
I think it could have been handled a lot better, because it left a nasty taste in the mouth that we're supposed to be Celtic and do things in a certain way, and he was a guy really embarrassed, had been deposed, and I think that had repercussions for the Celtic club.
In Brian Dempsey, the board had made a powerful enemy and had given the fans a figurehead for their discontent. The rebels, as they became known, were gearing up for a fight, and the board knew it.
Oh, we knew the clouds were gathering thick and fast. Jack was the chairman at the time, and he came to see me and said he was going to relinquish his chairmanship. Because it was the history of the Kellys, I said, right, I'll take it on, knowing I'd be under pressure. And when you have a young family and a wife and you're saying, God, they deserve this, you know.
The board's greatest weapon against the growing rebel forces would have been to put a winning team on the park. That didn't happen, and after another trophyless season, they decided on another personnel change.
Liam Brady is the new manager of Celtic Football Club.
He may have been a managerial novice, but the board had high hopes that Liam Brady could do for Celtic what Graham Souness had done for Rangers. Believing they'd found the answer to their on-field problems, the board turned to Terry Cassidy in the newly created post of Celtic Chief Executive to solve their off-field ones. Cassidy's job was to find a site and secure funding for their new all-seated stadium.
I felt that the best solution for Celtic was not to stay at Celtic Park, because of the various constraints that site imposed.
This morning, Celtic has applied for outline planning permission for a major property development at a 30-hectare site in Hammerslang.
We had the offer of the finance there to do the deal. But of course, the rebels didn't want that to happen, because that would have outflanked them, it would have set the club on a stable financial basis, and their cash wouldn't have been needed.
He went for a deal which was a house of cards, scramble slang. Let's all do this PR thing. Nobody'd sign anything. This guy puts up the money, he puts up the sponsorship, somebody puts up the land. Well, it doesn't work that way, you know what I mean? You really have to have somebody there taking a risk and putting money up for anything of that scale to happen.
The people who were advising us, they were sure this would take off and it would be a reality. Unfortunately, bit by bit, it eroded and they didn't get the backing they thought they were going to get from major sponsors. So we're back to square one again.
1994, and a lot had happened since Celtic last won a trophy. The Berlin Wall had come down, Nelson Mandela had been released from prison, apartheid had collapsed, and by 1994 Mandela had even been elected president of South Africa.
The time for the healing of the wounds has come.
Closer to home, 1994 also saw the first passenger trains run on the Channel Tunnel rail link, perfect for those short visits to Europe, something Celtic were becoming increasingly used to in the early 1990s. And as the on-field performance continued to deteriorate, so the fans continued to organise their opposition to the board.
The 12,000-strong affiliation of registered supporters clubs has just published the results of a survey which is a vote of no confidence in the current board.
They were asked, do you believe the directors' plan for a new stadium in Cambuslang will materialise? 100% say no. Do you support the current Celtic Board of Directors? 100% again saying no. And are you prepared to take action to bring about change? In this case, 100% said yes.
I think the fans, most of them, through the fanzines that emerged particularly, Not The View and so on, became more educated about the constitution of our company and the board and the responsibilities of directors. And they weren't prepared to sit back and just accept the club being as it was.
Please silence, get a board down! The closer I get, you're wasting your time.
At the moment, obviously we're understaffed, we don't have any money. and the board don't seem to be doing anything for us.
You're wasting your time. I will be.
Chris White and the whole of the Celtic board just say we can't do it anymore and get somebody in that can do it. Brian Dempsey's a man.
Bad debt that you can't pay. Take the easy way and give in.
Sales for Change are here to ask the board, tell the fans, what is the future? What does the future hold for Celtic? We want answers now.
More than 1,000 Celtic supporters have met in Glasgow to rally support for their campaign to remove the club's board.
I remember going to a fans rally in the old Shettleston Town Hall. It was packed to the rafters, and it was only Brian Dempsey who was speaking. And he never had a piece of paper, he never had a speech written down, and he strolled onto this stage, and they were enthralled to this man.
Once dismissed as a small band of malcontents by the board, the fans were now a major player in the battle for control of Celtic. They were well organised, well financed, and extremely vocal.
I'm not sure, looking back, if there's been a fans pressure group that's been as significant or successful as that group.
As fans of all ages kept vigil in the car park, the rebels secretly bought up Celtic shares.
Part of my research had shown that nobody was actually in control of Celtic, and there was a whole lot of disenfranchised, unsatisfied shareholders who were more than willing to sell their shares, and by following that route we managed to acquire a 40% shareholding in Celtic in about 6 months.
I felt that concerted pressure was basically impossible to resist, because they'd have the fans on one side, the money on one side, the investors on one side, and nothing on their side.
But the board had the arithmetic, controlling 60% of Celtic's voting shares. But in the face of the mounting external pressure, they sought a legal solution to ensure they stuck together.
They signed a compact amongst them, a shareholders' trust, not as directors, as shareholders, whereby none of them would sell their shares to anyone else without first offering the shares to the others in the group. So they had a controlling group together, which added up to enough, as long as it voted together, to block any changes.
The purpose of the agreement that we had was to try and bring some stability. I thought that the board was clearly very disunited, and therefore all of us signed this agreement to try and introduce an element of unity to the board and allow things to improve.
It was like a kind of suicide pact. It had a kind of bunker feeling about it, didn't it? You know, it's as if they're going to pick up a revolver at any moment and blow their brains out. It was a very kind of claustrophobic feel to it. They intended to create an impression of strength. That shows you how misguided they were. It just seemed desperate.
And indeed, it was this pact that brought them down ultimately, which is ironic given it was supposed to protect their position.
Over in the rebel camp, Fergus McCann and Brian Dempsey were not immune to infighting and division.
Well, both camps, if they can be called both camps, were never entirely always in union. Big personalities, significant amounts of money involved, sometimes differing agendas, and it was very difficult to keep everybody on the same path, pointing in the same direction at the same time.
But where it mattered most, Celtic continued to struggle. In early February, Celtic visited Falkirk for what should have been a routine Scottish Cup tie. Days after the Falkirk disaster, the Kelly cousins bravely faced the disgruntled fans live on STV's Sport in Question.
I felt a duty to explain to supporters as publicly as possible what our position was. There have been no offers of money of that nature to Celtic that the board have turned down.
Not at all. Nobody has. We read in the papers every day about various individuals. Yeah. There's just no truth in that at all.
I read it in the papers as well, Archie, but no one contacts the boards with the board of Celtic Football Club and asks to put that amount of money into the club. It astonished me that when I came to the studio, there was empty seats there that had been allocated to the rebels, but they had decided not to turn up. I mean, it convinced me that the public case that we had was better than the public case they had.
The harsh reality was that as long as Celtic fielded a losing team, the board's case, however good, would always fall on deaf ears. That season, Rangers had come within 90 minutes of the European Cup final, and in May 1993 completed a domestic clean sweep, winning the Scottish Cup at Celtic Park. In the early 90s, Celtic didn't have the financial muscle to compete with Rangers in the transfer market. They had little money to spend, and when they did spend it, it wasn't always spent wisely.
Well, I'm probably more renowned for making goals than actually scoring.
Frankly, when he told me there was a possibility of me going in a swap deal with Chris Morris, well, I couldn't believe it. Delighted.
The calibre of player that Celtic signed at the time was deeply unimpressive. You ask any Celtic fan and he'll utter two words to you: Wayne and Biggins. I'm sure that Wayne Biggins was probably not a bad striker, but he'll go down in the annals of Scottish football history as being not just a dud, but a dud that represented a hopeless period for Celtic.
As Celtic scraped around in the bargain basement, Rangers were smashing records. They set a British transfer record by paying Dundee United £4 million for Duncan Ferguson, a young striker with huge potential, but with a reputation for off-field trouble.
His conviction for attacking a man in a bar was his third for assault in 2 years.
Sheriff Charles Smith told Ferguson that during his year of probation, he must get into no further trouble. He must report to the person assigned to his case and take counsel. This, he said, will help you to grow up. Will you grow up over the coming year, Duncan?
He had been told, you cannot, for the next number of months, be in trouble of any kind. Now, everybody was assuming out in the street, nightclubs, all of that sort of stuff, but the actual instruction and order was anywhere.
Despite his hefty price tag, Ferguson's Rangers career had a stuttering start. A loss of form and injury restricted him to just 16 first-team appearances and 1 goal. His only goal of that season came in a 4-0 drubbing of Raith Rovers on April 16th, 1994. It was a match that was to change the course of Duncan Ferguson's life.
Why you look so sad?
In 1994, the racial fault line in American society was exposed when O.J. Simpson was charged with the murder of his former wife and her friend. This was just weeks after a jury had awarded Rodney King $3.8 million compensation after his beating by Los Angeles police officers. But doing his best to repair race relations, and let's face it, his own career in 1994, was Michael Jackson. The king of pop married the daughter of a real king, Lisa Marie Presley. At the start of the 1993-94 season, however, the fairy tale wedding between Celtic and Liam Brady seemed headed for the divorce courts.
Closed down by Slater. Ratio, Durant with Galloway. Bit of wrestling there by Durant, was that? Haitley scores for Rangers!
Another defeat to Rangers, another cup exit. Celtic needed another manager. With another Old Firm match at Ibrox looming, Celtic moved swiftly. For his first game in charge, Lou McCarry took his team to Ibrox.
McCall getting in the cross, and the ball in the back of the net. Goalkeeper commits himself. He's dropped it. The chance on here for Collins. He must score. It's the in-swinger. He's under pressure, and Celtic have...
That first game victory was to be the high point of McCarry's Celtic career. Despite the joy on the Celtic bench, the truth was his team was still well adrift of Rangers. And as 1994 approached, it was clear that the bitter and protracted campaign for control of Celtic was about to reach a conclusion. In late November 1993, the rebels gathered their forces and their newly acquired 40% shareholding for one final push to topple the board and take control of Celtic. They met in a Glasgow hostelry ahead of what would be an extraordinary general meeting.
that we knew there were meetings in Glasgow prior to an EGM, so they had their script already, so they were all lined up, so I was the guy in the middle sort of saying I had to fend off questions, but it was all orchestrated.
At the meeting, the rebels planned to offer Celtic £12.5 million of new investment. It was to be a seminal moment in the battle for control of Celtic Football Club.
Celtic are £5 million in debt. If the Celtic directors are going to reject those proposals, they can only reject them if they have the money themselves to put in.
And Jack McGinn at the same meeting is saying, well, if MD offered me that much money and so forth, MD would be a fool to turn it down. And 10 minutes later they had a vote, turned it down.
We had a vote and we needed a 2/3 majority to get beyond the first resolution, and we failed, we couldn't get that.
But the meeting had a useful purpose because what it did, it showed, I think, to everyone that the board was in a completely untenable position, having been confronted with a serious proposal which was financially backed, had no answer to it whatsoever, and basically were sitting there with no solutions and really no basis for continuing in charge.
There were various solutions to Celtic's financial problems. We had one of them. But I think our solution would have preserved the traditions of Celtic in a way that haven't been preserved.
The board's only hope of preserving those traditions would require a miracle revival of the team's on-field performance.
Rifled and low, still on London, touched in there! In the end, it's a goal scored by Tommy Coyne for Motherwell.
Out of the Scottish Cup, Celtic's season had effectively ended in January. The miracle the directors needed hadn't happened, and the writing was on the wall for the family dynasties.
Events came to a head in the beginning of 1994 very, very quickly.
As their financial crisis became more critical and their hold on the club became less secure, the directors became more desperate. They dramatically announced that the stadium project at Cambuslang was back on, thanks to Swiss-based finance company Jeffinor.
Jeffinor, Gefinor.
But the plan collapsed almost immediately.
A spokesman at Jeffinor's Geneva office told me tonight he was fed up receiving calls about a deal his company knew nothing about.
After that, the bank moved in.
So the banks put us under real pressure that we had to change.
The club's bankers have summoned directors to a meeting where it's believed personal guarantees have been sought to cover the club's overdraft.
They were going to put the club into liquidation. Now, it was quite clear they were wanting to put pressure on us by this threat of liquidation to allow the rebels to come in.
To prevent that happening, Michael Kelly, David Smith and Chris White met with the retail millionaire Gerald Weichsfeld and agreed to sell him their shares. Around the same time, the rest of the board, led by Chairman Kevin Kelly, met with the Bank of Scotland and agreed a rescue package that involved the sacking of cousin Michael, David Smith and Chris White.
Not a pleasant thing to do, especially when you've known them for years, So that was a disappointment, but you're in the situation, as the bank said, well, you're the chairman, you've got to do it,
Another call the bank suggested he make was to his long-time adversaries.
The bank said they wanted £1 million by close of business the following day, with another $4 million to follow.
The only person able and willing to invest that amount of money was in Phoenix, Arizona, when the call came.
I got a colleague of Brian Dempsey called me to say, look, the bank is going to be moving in tomorrow and we need to do something about it. So I said, OK, I'll be over there.
Well, events at Parkhead have been the focus of attention all day from the moment that Fergus McCann touched down at Glasgow Airport.
I had to fly overnight and so forth, got there the next day and every other press at the airport banging on the car and all this.
Met him at the airport and he went straight to the bank to sign the necessary papers to stop Celtic getting into receivership. And I witnessed those papers and I remember letting out a sigh and looking at my watch and it said 11:52, which was 8 minutes before the bank's deadline, for putting the club into receivership.
we've been able this morning to make sure that the financial position of the club is secure.
Was Celtic that close to receivership?
I would think so.
How close?
Oh, it was a dramatic time. There's a lot of people outside and you know, pouring rain and maybe a couple of thousand folks outside the stadium wondering what's going to happen, waiting to what happened. Brian Dempsey there says to me, I'm going to talk, I should say something to the supporters, I've got to see what's going on. And at that time I told them what to say. I said, just go out and say, the game is over. The Rebels have won.
The game is over. The Rebels have won.
Brian Dempsey and Fergus McCann are this evening in effective control of Celtic Football Club.
We have every intention of reaching the objectives that you want, which is Celtic at the very top.
Once in control at Celtic Park, the jockeying for position within the rebel camp intensified, and the dormant tensions between Dempsey and McCann, put aside to fight the old regime, quickly resurfaced.
One didn't want one side to gain financially out of it, and the other one made it clear, that would be Fergus McCann, that this was a financial arrangement. So their merger was a sort of business marriage of convenience, if you like, but like many marriages, they'll break down under pressure.
Brian Dempsey, he wanted me to put up the money and he'd be the chairman. I had 2/3 of everything I owned in that club. I'd put up at that point just over £9 million, and I felt that given all the politics and all the infighting and all the agendas and all the people who wanted, you had to have a 51% position to be able to get things done.
The crowds returned with high expectations for the first home match of the McCann regime against Motherwell. But if he hadn't known before, the new owner was reminded of just how steep the road to recovery was going to be.
Jimmy Dolan sending it through. Arnott's there. Still it's Arnott, and Motherwell take the lead.
But after years on the front pages, at least Celtic was now making headlines on the back. Their fervent hope was that that's how it would stay. Almost immediately following McCann's arrival at Celtic, it would be their bitter rivals Rangers who went from dominating back pages to monopolising the front pages in the most dramatic circumstances imaginable. In April 1994, with Rangers cruising to victory against relegation-doomed Raith Rovers, Duncan Ferguson became involved with Rovers defender Jock McStay. His headbutt went unpunished by the officials, but someone with a bit more power than an SFA referee was watching.
Rangers' Duncan Ferguson has been charged with assaulting Raith Rovers player John McStay.
For a procurator fiscal to charge Duncan Ferguson on that and then him go to jail, it still shocks me to this day even talking about it. I mean that was a disgraceful decision.
I think footballers had the idea that a football pitch was immune from reality and certainly immune from the law. Well, that changed.
And where does he do it? In a football match, a big football match, packed stadium, and that's where he does it. So it's not as though he could say, it wasn't me.
The Scotland striker Duncan Ferguson has been sentenced to 3 months in prison.
3 judges rejected his appeal against a 3-month sentence for headbutting another player. The law lord said the sentence should stand as a deterrent to other sportsmen.
I think the Scottish game learned that it's not above the law of the land, and previously it probably felt it had been.
There's a close line on, what's right and what's wrong, but Duncan Ferguson one was it's still to this day just remarkable how that was allowed to happen.
After an exhaustive legal process and a transfer south to Everton, the headbutt incident would eventually land Ferguson in Glasgow's notorious Barlinnie prison for 3 months. In 1994, Fergus McCann wasn't the only person to take over an ailing institution. Tony Blair was elected leader of the Labour Party.
I accept it with excitement, but also with humility.
Rangers, on the other hand, were anything but ailing. Despite the Duncan Ferguson distraction, in May 1994 they'd secured their 6th successive championship, and only Dundee United stood between them and unprecedented back-to-back trebles. Win that, and they'd write themselves into the history books.
If we'd have won eight trophies in a row, I think that would equal the world record, I think. Get the double, the treble in the first 2 trophies of the third year. I think we'd have won the Scottish Cup, it would have been a world record.
But the circumstances of Rangers' title win was cause for genuine concern at Ibrox. Although champions, Rangers hadn't won in their last 5 league games.
Walter Smith knew his team was flat. They'd lost momentum, and you know, you've heard football managers tell you all the time that if you switch off, it's difficult to switch back on for a big game. But you're still thinking, well, it's Dundee United. Dundee United, remember, who never won finals.
Dundee United were the original Scottish Cup bridesmaid. In each of their 6 previous final appearances between 1973 and 1991, United had left Glasgow as runners-up. This time there was a difference. Long-time manager Jim McLean had become chairman of the club, and replacing him in the dugout was former Yugoslav international Ivan Golac.
Certainly not your run-of-the-mill football manager. Highly intelligent, and you remember taking his players for walks in the park in Dundee when they should be training.
All this stuff, come on my lovely boys, let's go and smell the flowers, let's go walking in the park, let's take in the mountain air. That's what makes good footballers. That's what inspires footballers. Poetry, let's read some poems together, all this stuff, you know. That was Ivan Golac.
Oh, he's a character. Very full of himself, confident, bit arrogance about him, and just a very likeable guy, and one that he believed in his team.
You know, never ever in the history of a game anybody won anything, but it looks like we're going to be first to win the cup.
And the match is about to begin with Dundee United kicking off. Referee Douglas Hope blows his whistle, and the 1994 Kenneth Scottish Cup final is underway.
I can remember Petric playing it up the park, and I've just flicked it on. Dave McPherson's ushering it back to the goalkeeper, and Christian Daly's pressed him. Maxwell's kicked it off Christian, it's went back in Ali's hands, dropped it, Christian's played it across the goal, and it's come back right into a path from a yard, 2 yards. Another recollection was Guido van de Kamp, our goalkeeper, saving from Mikhailochenkov. It was an unbelievable save. I'm standing up the park thinking, maybe this could just be our day.
All eyes on the referee. Dundee United have won the Kenneth Scottish Cup. It's a truly remarkable finish to the season.
To be a player on the park to score the winning goal for your team is an amazing feeling.
That was a joyous day for football. This is Dundee United won the Scottish Cup, and it was good to be there. And their fans were actually a joy to behold. They were great.
The Right Honourable Ian Lang, Secretary of State for Scotland, presents the Scottish Cup to Maurice Malpass.
The following day in the City Square in Dundee, that was amazing. It will stay with me forever.
Come on and shine, shine like a star, shining so bright, like the star that you are.
I think when Golac won the Cup at United, Jim McLean must have been cursing his luck, because he wouldn't be human if would he, if he didn't think, damn it, you know, we got to these 5 finals and I never did it, and this guy comes over from Eastern Europe and does it at the first time of asking.
See, honestly, I understand your question, and I understand that most people think that way. My thoughts were such that we'd get beat that often in cup finals, and it was great to see the buses coming away with smiles on the Dundee United faces rather than the normal copying me.
The streets of Dundee weren't the only places full of smiles that summer. Celtic Park had its fair share of happy faces too, unless, of course, it was Lou Macari's.
Celtic have sacked their manager Lou Macari after only 8 months in the job.
I'm delighted to announce that Tommy Burns has accepted my offer to be the new manager of Celtic Football Club.
4 men have tried to fill the Steen's shoes since the legend moved on. Tommy Burns will be the first to attempt the impossible since the old family's regime was swept away.
He knew it was too soon. You would talk to him and you would say, are you sure? And he'd say, well, no, I'm not. But I don't think I can let the opportunity pass because it might not come again.
Burns' biggest problem was in reining in the expectations of the fans. Having rid themselves of what they saw as the major obstacle to success, they expected a trophy, and quickly. Their opportunity came thanks to Brian O'Neill's extra-time winner against Aberdeen. The League Cup final wasn't just Celtic's first final for 4 years. It was also the platform from which the new owner would launch Celtic's fan-based recovery plan.
Celtic are in the Coca-Cola Cup final.
There was immense pressure on Tommy going into that final, but he did think he would win it.
And so did everyone else, as their cup final opponents would be a first division side, either Airdrie or Raith Rovers.
Like the pace of Lawrence.
Their semi-final was in extra time. When?
Well, now the linesman has flagged that was outside the box.
The goalkeeper Scott Thompson sent off in the extra time, and we brought on a young keeper, Brian Potter, only 16 or 17. He'd just come through the YTS, lovely young boy, and we all relied on him to get us to the League Cup final.
But they'd no idea how much they'd have to rely on him. The match finished level, and penalty kicks would decide who'd face Celtic in the final.
With so much confidence in the kid, and he ended up with a fantastic save.
Potter has saved it! Raith Rovers are in the final, and 17-year-old Brian Potter has taken them there.
The League Cup final at Ibrox on November 24th, 1994 was Raith Rovers' first cup final for 46 years. No one outside of Kirkcaldy gave them a chance. But it's funny how things turn out.
Another chance on this time must be the equaliser. It's Andy Walker for Celtic. It goes for Nicholas. That's Walker. And tended by Charlie Nicholas. Nicholas is surely now won the cup for Celtic.
I'm sure even the Raith Rovers supporters sitting in the stands watching on the telly thought that as well. But we had a spirit amongst us, and I remember setting the ball with Ali Graham, and we says to each other, listen, we've got maybe one more chance left here.
Jim McCluskey checking his watch, and there it goes, the final whistle. It's a penalty shootout.
I knew that Paul McStay was going up, but I didn't even see him placing the ball. I didn't see him taking a penalty kick.
Unthinkable, surely, for the skipper to miss.
But the next minute the place erupted from our supporters, and I knew we'd won our cup.
Mrs. Penny Hughes hands the trophy to Gordon Dalziel, and the Cummins Stanley runs.
We all went back in the bus, and the bus celebrations was absolutely fantastic. We'd singing on the bus, and it was great. It summed up our team spirit. It was fantastic obviously for the town of Kirkcaldy and everybody concerned with the club.
There was indeed dancing in the streets of Raith that night. But as Kirkcaldy celebrated, the mood at Celtic Park could not have been more sombre. Celtic's new owners had been banking on a cup final win from which to launch their appeal for supporters to purchase shares in the new business.
It was a big question mark at the time. Did we go ahead with the share issue having such a big downer? Everybody was just saying, how could you lose a game against a team like Raith Rovers? My goodness. It was just very hard to take that whole situation. But we went ahead. We felt it was a bigger issue. It wasn't about one game. It wasn't about 1 year. It was about the longer term.
Celtic's EGM has given unanimous approval to Fergus McCann's plan for a £21 million share issue and a £24 million redevelopment of Celtic Park.
I think it was a kind of make or break moment. The whole McCann project could have foundered if fans had turned their back on the club and walked away.
It's in the right direction, Paul. Hopefully for the punters.
The fans didn't walk away. And in December 1994, they turned out in their thousands to financially back the man they'd supported from the car park for many years.
It was a daunting sight to see that. I felt huge, heavy burden of responsibility. I cannot let these people down. You know, it was just a moment that's stayed with me ever since.
Strange thing, football. On January 1st, 1994, a defeat at home to Rangers had provoked such fury among the Celtic support that within 2 months the century-old dynasty that had run the club had been swept from power. 11 months later, a much more shocking defeat in a cup final against First Division opposition persuaded those same fans to part with over £10 million of their hard-earned cash as they bought into Fergus McCann's dream for the club and made the Celtic share issue the most successful in British football.
A few months later, I was out shopping on a Saturday morning in Glasgow. This man was carrying this little baby, and he saw me and said, "Fergus, Celtic's youngest shareholder." Just you think about that, it's a daunting thing. It's a huge thing in people's minds. It's part of people's identity. It is very important. And I think you can't underestimate that.